Okay, over to you, Gama. Thank you.
Okay, all right, no problem. And Taeed, you can join her. Okay, thank you. Okay, so my session is basically about what people have been talking about before, about export and opportunities and everything. Before, can everybody hear me? I assume they can. So if not, just drop me a message or whatever. So hopefully I will try and sort things out. What I'm going to do as part of my presentation, I think it's important to tell you about who we are, first of all. I don't want it to sound like a marketing spree, basically, which is not. It's important to understand what we do, and then you'll understand why I point out some of the challenges we face and other people's may face when it comes to export. Okay, all right. So next slide, I will go down. All right. We are Shazans, basically. We're based in the UK. We are the #1 halal brand in the UK. We were set up about 5 years ago, primarily in the fresh and frozen areas. You've probably seen us at various exhibitions overseas and in the UK. We normally have a stand and we try and interact with our consumers wherever we can to get some feedback and see what their thoughts are. I'll whiz through this to try and make up some time, hopefully. As I mentioned, we're the UK's #1 provider. We're a fully integrated poultry and red meat operation. So that means we can guarantee farm to fork. We are also independently halal certified. And one of our visions was that we wanted to not just be in the UK, but we want to be a global brand. And part of that aspiration was to look at export, which is where our experience is coming. Okay. Now, operations, we have a poultry facility based in Eye where we do fresh chilled and wholesale production. We also have a frozen facility in Preston where we do burgers, sausages, frozen. We also run concession butchery counters in the multiples like Tesco and Morrison's under different brands. And we also supply retail pre-packed products to the top 3, so Tesco's, Morrison's, Asda's. And we also the sole supplier for halal to KFC in the UK, which obviously we go through the Halal Food Authority. The next line I've said is we're the only approved poultry supplier for export and red meat ? Because whenever we go for exhibitions and things, that's what we're told. But I'll come on to that later on. Okay. As I mentioned before, the type of products is fresh poultry, minces, burgers, sausages, samosas, burgers, ethnic snacks. Okay. What standard do we operate to? When we sort of started the business, our view was that we needed to operate with the standard that complied with the basic principles. So as a general rule, our brand values are we only source and handle halal products. All our animals are reared to strict welfare standards. And animals need to be alive and healthy at the point of slaughter. All slaughtering is to be carried out by hand by a Muslim. The animals are slaughtered with a swift incision. The blood must be completely drained. Slaughterman is carried out by a trained slaughterman. And we wanted to be independently accredited by reputable halal bodies. Those were our brand values. Now, it's important to note these values because when I talk later on, then you'll understand how it's linked back and how that has implications for export and other opportunities that may exist. So when we talk about the brand values, what does it actually mean when it comes down to practices in these brand values? Well, what it actually means is if you want to work with the reputable halal bodies, apologies if I put HMC on there, but they're reputable as just as reputable as the HFA. It means that you got a certification standard that you work to. You have supervision on site. You understand what type of stunning you're employing to ensure that the animal is alive at the point of slaughter. The equipment parameters are defined. The slaughterman there is Muslim, knife, reciting the prayer, and also you got farm assurance so that you got from farm to fork, chain of custody. We don't normally emphasize this on our marketing. We just regard it as a base standard as far as we're concerned. Sites are BRC and it's 100% halal site. And this sort of standard we apply across lamb, mutton, and across the other species as well. Okay, it just gives you an idea of what we're working to. Now to come to export setup and learnings. Obviously, when we talk about export, we generally refer to the Middle East. Obviously, you know, the main area where we're sort of focused on at the moment is the UAE. When looking at export, what does it actually mean? We mapped out our supply chain. So what it means is basically we would produce product, we would have it picked up by the customer, and as some of the colleagues mentioned earlier about the ports, and we viewed it that would either go to the airport or would go to a shipping. And then from there, depending on who we were selling to, basically, they would take ownership, and then it would go to the country, and from there it would be distributed to the retailers, wholesalers. That's the sort of model that we sort of envisaged when we started. Things that we need to consider at that time was, well, what route are we going to go to the export market? Did we need to get approval for our sites? Did the products need to be approved? What halal standards are we working to? And if we are competing for export, who are our competitors? Pricings, costings, how are the products going to be benchmarked? Because if you're competing with a product that you want to sell to a customer, it needs to be equivalent so that your commercials are equivalent. What was our strategy? Did we want to be there in terms of own label, or did we want to go there as a brand? And the opportunity, if we're going to spend all this money, well, what's the opportunity like? Is it going to be 3 months? Is it a spot purchase? Is it going to carry on for a long time? These are all sort of things that we consider and you may want to consider. So the route to market, it's an interesting one because you can either go through agents, you can go through distributors, exporters, or government agencies, trade shows, retailers, manufacturers. The routes depends on whatever's suitable to you on what's best in terms of cost, really. Now, my view would be is that when you do go through agents, you need to vet the agents, because our experience has been is you will be approached by various bodies, but their credentials don't always match what they're saying. So it's always worth vetting and to work with reputable agents. Okay. Next one is approvals. When you do decide to get approval, as my colleagues have mentioned earlier, you need to be certified by a reputable halal body. The body we chose to work with for UAE was Halal Food Authority. Normally the audit is conducted. And in this particular example, when we work with HFA, we decided to do an own label product for a major retailer. The labels were approved in the country. And basically it was fairly smooth. But our experience has also been is that's not always that smooth, because we've tried to get approval with the HFA through other agents and other bodies, and it can be complicated. And a lot of the complications come into when it comes to the standards, because what we found from our experience is that we will be competing in UAE, for example, and the standards aren't equivalent. And primarily these standards, for example, whether you do mechanical slaughter or you do hand slaughter, has an implication on cost. Also, when it comes to farm assurance, they're not equivalent either. Now, part of that can be due to us working to different halal standards and there being numerous halal standards. So I can understand the reason for it, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't help when it comes to export, when you want to utilize that opportunity, because 60–70% of the time, whilst everybody will talk about standards, it will always come down to cost. So they will always go down to the cheaper option, which means that we sometimes will find ourselves at a disadvantage unless a product being sold is actually positioned in such a manner where it can justify what we put in. And our experience has been that that is not always the case. Now, I'm quite happy to have that discussion offline with specific examples to demonstrate what we're talking about, because we've been there and we've done it and we understand where it is. Also, when we're being approached by agents, what tends to happen is you get a promise of a lot of business. and the volumes. But when you actually sit down and look at it and work through a plan and say, hang on, if I'm going to put this amount of product down, what it means, and you go through the detail, what you find is the justification for doing export isn't there. It is an opportunity, but as a business, you need to be sure that the opportunity actually delivers. Otherwise, you end up wasting a lot of money sending product tenders, approvals, but the business isn't there. And the business isn't there because it's not a level playing field. And that's what we sort of found on a number of occasions that went through the process. And then you come and say, well, hang on, that product is not equivalent. And this is where I think you need to be very clear. So that's why I say costs can be high and need to be offset with product costs, but no point to the business unless you know what it's actually going to deliver for you. So the next one, basically, all I would do is, these are sort of questions you needs to be sort of resolved. Basically, standards required are not clear, because when you actually look at the export, with the exception of ESMA, it's very difficult to determine equivalence, because what you'll find is a lot of the halal bodies will be approved that you're competing with. When you actually go through their standard, it's not equivalent to the HFA standard. However, when it comes to the UAE, they were regarded as equivalent. And when the points made out, there's no way of differentiating that standard. We've had these sort of discussions offline and quite happy to have them again. So we worked the HFA standard, and some of the standards overseas are not equivalent. Quite happy to take that off that line. Now that will affect costing, supply chain and competitiveness. Again, a lot of time, money, effort can be wasted during tenders as a result. So my view would be is make sure you understand the standard and who your competitor is, so that you can decide whether you want to take part before you end up wasting money. And that's basically it. You know, if anybody's got any questions, quite happy to take, but just thought I'd better share some of our experiences with you. Okay, thank you very much.